The Mythical Creature. A Tale of Courage and Redemption. Chapter 1. The Shadow over Eldervale. In the lush, rolling hills of a forgotten corner of the world, nestled between ancient forests and mist-shrouded mountains, lay the village of Eldervale. For generations, the people of Eldervale had lived in harmony with the land, tending to their crops, raising their livestock, and passing down the old ways from parent to child. The village was a tapestry of thatched-roof cottages, winding cobblestone streets, and the ever-present scent of freshly baked bread wafting from the local bakery. At the heart of Eldervale stood the village square, dominated by an ancient oak tree that had witnessed countless summers and winters. It was here that the villagers gathered to celebrate harvests, to mourn losses, and to share in the joys and sorrows of their close-knit community. The oak's gnarled branches stretched out like protective arms over the weathered stone fountain that burbled day and night, its water said to possess healing properties gifted by the spirits of the forest. For as long as anyone could remember, Eldervale had been a place of peace and prosperity. The fields yielded bountiful harvests, the orchards bore fruit in abundance, and the surrounding forests provided game and timber aplenty. The villagers took pride in their self-sufficiency and their deep connection to the land that sustained them. But as the crisp autumn air began to settle over the village that fateful year, a shadow fell across Eldervale, a shadow that would test the very fabric of their existence and challenge everything they held dear. It began with whispers, hushed conversations in the corners of the tavern, worried glances exchanged over garden fences. At first, the signs were subtle. A few missing chickens here, a trampled patch of crops there. The villagers dismissed these occurrences as the work of foxes, or perhaps a particularly bold wolf. Yet as the days grew shorter and the nights longer, the incidents became more frequent, more destructive. Lyra, the village healer, was the first to voice her concerns openly. A woman of middle years with silver-streaked hair and eyes that held the wisdom of the ages, Lyra had long served as Eldervale's connection to the old ways, the keeper of ancient knowledge passed down through generations. "There's a darkness stirring in the woods," she declared one evening, her voice carrying across the hushed village square. "Something old, something that should have remained sleeping." The villagers gathered around her, their faces etched with worry. Among them stood Thorn, the village blacksmith, his muscular arms folded across his broad chest. "What manner of creature could it be, Lyra?" he asked, his deep voice rumbling like distant thunder. Lyra's gaze swept over the assembled crowd, lingering for a moment on each face. "I fear it may be the Amarok," she said softly, the name hanging in the air like a death knell. A collective gasp rippled through the gathering. The Amarok was a creature of legend, a monstrous wolf of gigantic proportions said to hunt alone in the deepest, darkest parts of the forest. According to the old tales, it possessed not only immense strength but also a cunning intelligence that made it a formidable foe to any who dared cross its path. "But the Amarok is just a story," protested Lena, the baker's wife, clutching her young son closer to her side. "A tale to frighten children into behaving." Lyra shook her head slowly. "All legends have their roots in truth, Lena. And I fear this truth has awakened and now threatens our very existence." As if to punctuate her words, a bone-chilling howl echoed from the distant forest, causing the villagers to huddle closer together, their eyes wide with fear. In that moment they knew that their lives would never be the same again. Chapter 2. The First Strike. The following days brought an uneasy quiet to Eldervale. The villagers went about their daily tasks with a newfound wariness, casting frequent glances towards the looming forest that bordered their lands. Children were kept close to home, and few dared to venture out after sunset. It was on the fifth night after Lyra's warning that the Amarok struck in earnest. The moon hung full and bright in the sky, casting long shadows across the slumbering village. In the dead of night, a cacophony of terrified bleating shattered the silence. Thorn was the first to respond, bursting from his home with a lantern in one hand and his smithing hammer in the other. He raced towards the sheep pasture at the village's edge, his heart pounding in his chest. As he approached, the sickening scent of blood filled his nostrils. The scene that greeted him was one of carnage. The fence had been smashed as if it were made of twigs rather than sturdy oak. Sheep lay scattered across the field, their white wool stained crimson. Some still twitched in their death throes, while others lay ominously still. But it was not the dead that drew Thorn's attention. At the far end of the field, illuminated by the moonlight, stood a creature that defied belief. It was a wolf, yes, but one of impossible size. Its shoulder stood taller than a man, its body rippling with muscle beneath a coat of midnight black fur. But it was the eyes that truly chilled Thorn to his core, glowing orbs of amber that held an intelligence far beyond that of any normal beast. For a moment that seemed to stretch into eternity, Thorn and the Amarok locked gazes. Then, with a snarl that revealed fangs as long as daggers, the creature turned and bounded into the forest, leaving only destruction in its wake. By now, other villagers had arrived, their cries of dismay filling the night air as they surveyed the devastation. Lyra pushed her way through the crowd, her face grim as she took in the scene. "It's worse than I feared," she murmured, kneeling beside one of the fallen sheep. "This is no ordinary predator. The Amarok kills not just for food, but for the sheer pleasure of destruction." Thorn's hands clenched into fists at his sides. "We can't allow this to continue," he growled. "We must find a way to stop it before it destroys everything we've built." Lyra rose, placing a calming hand on Thorn's arm. "Patience, my friend. The Amarok is not a foe to be taken lightly. We must prepare, gather our strength, and seek wisdom from the old ways if we are to have any hope of defeating it." As the first light of dawn began to creep over the horizon, the villagers of Eldervale set about the grim task of burying their dead livestock and repairing what damage they could. But a pall of fear had settled over the village, a gnawing dread that this was only the beginning of their troubles. In the days that followed, the attacks continued. Each night brought fresh horrors: fields trampled and destroyed, livestock slaughtered, and even the occasional foolhardy villager who ventured out after dark found torn and broken at the forest's edge. The village elders gathered in council, debating long into the night on how best to protect their people and their livelihoods. Some argued for building higher fences and setting traps, while others insisted that they should abandon Eldervale altogether and seek safety in distant lands. But it was Lyra who offered a different solution. "There is an ancient ritual," she said, her voice cutting through the heated arguments. "A way to summon a champion, one who might stand against the Amarok and drive it back to the darkness from whence it came." The elders fell silent, all eyes turning to the village healer. "What manner of ritual?" asked old Gareth, the most senior among them. Lyra's expression was grave as she replied, "It is not without risk. The ritual calls upon the spirits of the forest to choose a champion from among us. But the one chosen must face the Amarok alone, with only their courage and the blessings of the spirits to aid them." A heavy silence fell over the gathering as the implications of Lyra's words sank in. To face the Amarok alone was tantamount to a death sentence. Yet, as they looked out over their beleaguered village, they knew that something had to be done. "Very well," old Gareth said at last, his voice heavy with the weight of the decision. "We shall perform this ritual. May the spirits choose wisely, for the fate of Eldervale now rests in their hands." As the council dispersed, none noticed the figure listening intently from the shadows. Lyra, a young woman barely out of her teens, felt her heart racing with a mixture of fear and excitement. All her life, she had yearned for adventure, for a chance to prove herself as more than just the daughter of the village tanner. Now, as she slipped away into the night, a plan began to form in her mind. She would not wait for the spirits to choose. She would take matters into her own hands and face the Amarok herself. For in her heart, Lyra knew that this was her destiny, the moment she had been waiting for all her life. Little did she know that her decision would set in motion a chain of events that would change not only her own fate but that of Eldervale and the Amarok itself. Chapter 3: The Chosen One. The night of the ritual arrived, shrouded in a mist that crept through Eldervale like ghostly fingers. The villagers gathered in solemn silence around the ancient oak in the village square, their faces illuminated by the flickering light of 100 candles. Lyra stood before them, her silver hair unbound and flowing in the gentle breeze. In her hands, she held a wooden bowl filled with a mixture of herbs and sacred waters from the fountain. As she began to chant in a language long forgotten by most, the air seemed to thicken with an otherworldly presence. "Spirits of the forest, guardians of the ancient ways," Lyra intoned, her voice carrying clearly despite its softness. "We call upon you in our hour of need. Choose from among us a champion, one worthy to stand against the darkness that threatens our home." As her words faded, a hush fell over the gathering. For a long moment nothing happened. Then a gust of wind swept through the square, extinguishing every candle save one. That single flame burned brighter than before, casting its light upon the face of Thorn, the village blacksmith. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Thorn stood tall, his expression a mixture of surprise and grim determination. "I accept this charge," he said, his deep voice steady despite the weight of responsibility that had just been placed upon his broad shoulders. Lyra approached him, dipping her fingers into the bowl she carried. With gentle movements she traced symbols on Thorn's forehead, cheeks, and the backs of his hands. "May the spirits guide your path and strengthen your arm," she said softly. "For the task ahead is fraught with peril." As the ritual concluded and the villagers began to disperse, offering words of encouragement and prayers for Thorn's success, none noticed the absence of one particular young woman. Lyra had watched the proceedings from the shadows, her heart heavy with disappointment. She had hoped, perhaps foolishly, that the spirits might choose her. But Lyra was not one to let fate dictate her actions. As the village settled into an uneasy sleep, she crept from her home, a packed bag slung over her shoulder and her father's old hunting bow in her hand. She paused at the edge of the forest, casting one last look back at the only home she had ever known. "I'm sorry, Thorn," she whispered into the night, "but I can't let you face this alone. Eldervale needs all the help it can get." With that, she plunged into the darkness of the forest, unaware that her actions would set in motion a series of events that would change everything. Meanwhile, Thorn spent the night in preparation. He forged a mighty axe, pouring all his skill and the blessings of the spirits into the weapon. As dawn broke, he stood at the village's edge, ready to embark on his quest to confront the Amarok. Lyra approached him, concern etched on her face. "Remember, Thorn," she said, pressing a small pouch of herbs into his hand. "The Amarok is not just a beast of flesh and blood. It is a creature of spirit as well. Strength alone may not be enough to defeat it." Thorn nodded gravely, tucking the pouch into his belt. "I understand, Lyra. I will not fail our people." As he turned to leave, a commotion arose from the tanner's house. Lyra's parents had discovered her absence and her hastily scrawled note explaining her intentions. The village erupted into chaos as the implications became clear. Thorn's expression darkened. "I must go after her," he declared. "She has no idea what she's walking into." But Lyra laid a restraining hand on his arm. "You cannot abandon your quest, Thorn. The spirits chose you for a reason. I will send others to search for Lyra, but you must face the Amarok. It is the only way to save our village." With a heavy heart, Thorn nodded. As he set off into the forest, the weight of 2 lives now rested upon his shoulders, his own, and that of the impetuous young woman who had ventured into danger unprepared. Chapter 4. Into the heart of darkness. Lyra moved through the forest with a mixture of excitement and trepidation. The woods she had known since childhood seemed different now, darker and more foreboding. Every shadow held the potential for danger, every rustle of leaves the possibility of the Amarok's approach. She had been traveling for hours, following what she hoped were signs of the creature's passage: broken branches, unusual scratch marks on trees, and the occasional tuft of midnight black fur caught on thorny bushes. As the day wore on, the forest grew denser, the trees pressing in closer, their gnarled branches blotting out much of the sunlight. It was nearing dusk when Lyra came upon a clearing that made her blood run cold. The ground was torn up as if by massive claws, and the surrounding trees bore deep gouges in their trunks. But it was the centerpiece of the clearing that truly horrified her. A pile of bones, some still bearing scraps of flesh, arranged in a deliberate pattern. "This is no ordinary wolf's den," Lyra whispered to herself, fighting back the urge to flee. She knelt to examine the bones more closely, noting with growing dread that some were unmistakably human. A twig snapped behind her and Lyra whirled, knocking an arrow to her bow in one fluid motion. But instead of the monstrous wolf she expected, she found herself face to face with Thorn, his mighty axe held at the ready. "Lyra," he growled, lowering his weapon. "What in the name of all that's holy are you doing out here?" Lyra straightened, trying to project a confidence she didn't entirely feel. "The same as you, I expect. Hunting the Amarok." Thorn's expression darkened. This isn't some game, girl. You have no idea what you're up against. Your parents are worried sick, and you've put the entire village at risk with your foolishness. Lyra felt a flash of anger at his dismissive tone. I'm not a child, Thorn. I may not have been chosen by the spirits, but I have just as much right to defend our home as you do. Their argument was cut short by a bone-chilling howl that echoed through the forest. Both Lyra and Thorn instinctively moved closer together, their eyes scanning the deepening shadows. We need to get out of here, Thorn said urgently. It's not safe to face the Amarok at night. We'll make camp and continue the hunt at dawn. Lyra opened her mouth to protest but thought better of it. As much as she hated to admit it, Thorn was right. They needed to be at their best if they hoped to stand a chance against the monstrous wolf. They retreated to a more defensible position, a small rise backed by a cliff face. As Thorn built a fire, Lyra set about creating simple alarms, strings of dried leaves and small bells that would alert them to any approach. As they sat by the fire, an uneasy silence fell between them. Finally, Lyra spoke. I'm sorry for worrying everyone, she said softly, but I couldn't just sit back and do nothing while our village was under threat. Thorn's expression softened slightly. I understand the feeling, Lyra, but rushing headlong into danger without a plan is no way to help. You could have been killed. And you couldn't? Lyra countered. Chapter 5. Revelations in the Darkness. As the night deepened around them, Lyra and Thorn took turns keeping watch. The forest was alive with sounds, the hoot of an owl, the rustle of small creatures in the underbrush, but there was no sign of the Amarok. During her watch, Lyra found her mind wandering to the stories she'd heard about the mythical creature. Thorn, she whispered, careful not to wake him fully. What do you know about the Amarok? Beyond the tales we tell children, I mean. Thorn stirred, sitting up with a soft groan. Not much more than you, I'd wager, he admitted. Ira would be the one to ask. But I remember my grandmother speaking of it once long ago. Lyra leaned in, eager to hear more. Thorn's eyes grew distant as he recalled the memory. She said the Amarok wasn't always a creature of destruction, he began. In the oldest tales it was a guardian of the forest, a spirit of balance. But something changed it, twisted its nature into something dark and vengeful. What could have that kind of power? Lyra wondered aloud. Thorn shook his head. That she didn't say. Or perhaps I was too young to understand. But she hinted that the change was tied to the actions of humans, somehow. Their conversation was interrupted by a haunting howl that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. Both Lyra and Thorn leapt to their feet, weapons at the ready. From the darkness beyond their campfire came a low, rumbling growl. Slowly, deliberately, the Amarok emerged into the flickering light. It was even more terrifying up close, massive beyond belief, with fur as dark as a moonless night and eyes that glowed with an otherworldly intelligence. Lyra felt her breath catch in her throat. Every instinct screamed at her to run, but she stood her ground, arrow nocked and ready. Thorn hefted his axe, its blade gleaming in the firelight. Stand ready, Lyra, he murmured. But don't attack unless I give the word. Something's not right here. Indeed, the Amarok made no move to attack. Instead, it sat on its haunches at the edge of the firelight, regarding them with those eerie, intelligent eyes. Then, to their utter astonishment, it spoke. So, the Amarok rumbled, its voice like gravel and thunder. The village sends its champions at last. Have you come to slay the monster, little humans? Lyra and Thorn exchanged shocked glances. This was far beyond anything they had expected. We've come to stop you from destroying our home, Thorn replied, his voice steady despite his surprise. Why have you attacked us? What have we done to earn your wrath? The Amarok's lips pulled back in what might have been a smile or a snarl. What have you done? You exist. You spread, you consume, you destroy. Your kind has forgotten the old ways, the balance that must be maintained. Lyra found her voice at last. But our village has always respected the forest, she protested. We take only what we need, replant what we harvest. The creature's glowing eyes fixed on her. Your village, perhaps. But you are not the only humans in this world. The actions of your kind elsewhere have consequences that ripple far and wide. As the Amarok spoke, the air around it seemed to shimmer. For a moment Lyra thought she saw not a monstrous wolf, but a majestic spirit creature, crowned with antlers and wreathed in starlight. Then the image was gone, leaving only the fearsome beast before them. The balance has been disrupted, the Amarok continued. The old magics wane, the spirits of the land cry out in pain. I am what I am because of what your kind has done to this world. Thorn lowered his axe slightly, his expression troubled. If what you say is true, then destroying our village won't solve anything. It will only add to the imbalance. The Amarok's eyes narrowed. Perhaps. But sometimes the forest must burn for new growth to emerge. Lyra stepped forward, her heart pounding but her voice clear. Then teach us, she said. Show us how to restore the balance. There must be a better way than destruction. For a long moment the Amarok was silent, its gaze moving between Lyra and Thorn. Then slowly it nodded. You show wisdom beyond your years, young one, it growled. Very well. I will stay my wrath. For now. But know this. If you fail to heed my teachings, if your people continue to disrupt the balance, I will return. And next time I will not be so merciful. With that, the Amarok turned and melted back into the shadows of the forest, leaving Lyra and Thorn to ponder the enormity of what had just transpired. They had come seeking a battle, but instead found themselves tasked with a far greater challenge, to bridge the gap between the old ways and the new, and to restore balance to a world teetering on the brink. As the first light of dawn began to creep through the trees, they knew their real journey was only just beginning. Chapter 6. The Path of Wisdom. The return journey to Eldervale was a quiet one, both Lyra and Thorn lost in thought about their encounter with the Amarok. The forest around them seemed different now, alive in a way they had never noticed before. Every rustling leaf, every chirping bird felt like a whispered secret, a piece of the great puzzle they now faced. As they neared the village, Lyra broke the silence. What do we tell them? She asked, her voice tinged with uncertainty. Will they even believe us? Thorn's brow furrowed as he considered the question. We tell them the truth, he said finally. All of it. What happens next? Well, that's up to all of us. The village erupted into chaos when they emerged from the forest. People rushed forward, some crying out in relief, others demanding explanations. Lyra's parents enveloped her in a tearful embrace, alternating between scolding her for her recklessness and expressing their joy at her safe return. Amidst the commotion, Lyra made her way to Thorn's side, her keen eyes taking in his troubled expression. You found more than you bargained for in those woods, didn't you? She asked softly. Thorn nodded grimly. Gather the village, he said. There's much we need to discuss. As the sun reached its zenith, the people of Eldervale assembled in the village square. The ancient oak tree stood sentinel over the gathering, its leaves rustling gently in the breeze as if listening to the momentous words about to be spoken. Thorn and Lyra stood before their friends and neighbors, recounting their encounter with the Amarok. As they spoke of its words, of the imbalance in the world and the task now set before them, a range of emotions played across the faces in the crowd: disbelief, fear, anger, and in some, a glimmer of understanding. When they finished, a heavy silence fell over the square. It was old Gareth who spoke first, his voice quavering with age but firm with conviction. If what you say is true, he said, then we have been blind to the wider world for far too long. We cannot ignore this warning. Murmurs of agreement and dissent rippled through the crowd. Lena, the baker's wife, stepped forward, her young son clutching her skirts. But how can we be expected to fix the problems of the entire world? She asked, her voice tinged with fear. We're just one small village. Ira moved to stand beside Thorn and Lyra, her silver hair gleaming in the sunlight. We start with ourselves, she said, her clear voice carrying across the square. We relearn the old ways, the ways of balance and respect for the land. And then we share that knowledge with others. And if we refuse? Called out a voice from the back of the crowd. If we choose to defend ourselves instead, to drive this Amarok away for good? Thorn's expression hardened. Then we doom not just ourselves but countless others, he said. The Amarok is a symptom, not the disease. If we don't address the root of the problem, it will only get worse. Lyra stepped forward, her eyes bright with determination. I know it seems overwhelming, she said, looking out at the faces of people she'd known all her life. But we don't have to do this alone. The Amarok spoke of spirits, of old magics. If we open ourselves to that knowledge, who knows what we might accomplish? A thoughtful silence fell over the gathering. Then slowly people began to nod. It wouldn't be easy, they knew. Changing lifelong habits, learning new ways of interacting with the world around them, it would be a challenge unlike any they had faced before. But as they looked at each other, at the village they had built and nurtured together, they knew it was a challenge they had to accept. In the days and weeks that followed, Eldervale began to transform. Under Lyra's guidance, the villagers rediscovered old rituals and practices that honored the spirits of the land. They learned to listen to the whispers of the forest, to read the signs in nature that told of coming changes in weather or the health of the ecosystem. Thorn turned his skills as a blacksmith towards creating tools that worked in harmony with the land rather than against it. Lyra, with her keen eye and newfound connection to the forest, became a bridge between the village and the natural world, helping to guide hunting and foraging practices that maintain the delicate balance of the ecosystem. But perhaps the most significant change came in the form of visitors. Word spread of the village that had made peace with the dreaded Amarok, of the wisdom they were rediscovering. People came from neighboring towns and distant cities, drawn by curiosity or desperation, seeking to learn the ways of balance. And so Eldervale became a beacon of hope, a living example of how humans could coexist with the natural world in harmony. It wasn't always easy, old habits died hard, and there were setbacks and moments of doubt. But with each passing season, as the land around them flourished and the bonds between the villagers and their environment deepened, they knew they were on the right path. The Amarok did return as promised, but not as a harbinger of destruction. Instead, it came as a guardian and a teacher, sharing ancient wisdom with those ready to listen. And in time, other spirits began to make themselves known, playful forest sprites, wise river nymphs, and more. As the veil between the human world and the realm of spirits thinned, Lyra, once the impetuous girl who had rushed headlong into danger, grew into a respected leader, her connection to both the human and spirit worlds making her a natural bridge between the two. Thorn, the stalwart protector, became a teacher in his own right, showing others how to create tools and structures that worked in harmony with the land. And Eldervale itself? It grew and changed, but always with an eye towards balance. The village became a place of pilgrimage for those seeking to reconnect with the old ways, a living example of how progress and tradition could coexist. As the years passed, the story of Eldervale and the Amarok spread far and wide. It became a tale told around campfires and in great halls alike, a reminder that even in the darkest of times, hope could be found in unexpected places, and that the power to change the world often began with changing oneself. And so what had begun as a tale of terror, of a village besieged by a mythical creature, became instead a story of redemption, of humans and nature finding a way to coexist in harmony. It was a new legend for a new age, one that would be told and retold for generations to come. Chapter 7: The Ripple Effect. As the seasons turned and years passed, the influence of Eldervale's transformation began to spread beyond the boundaries of the village and its surrounding forest. The ripples of change touched nearby towns first, then distant cities, and eventually entire kingdoms. Lyra, now a woman in her prime, found herself traveling far and wide as an ambassador of the new way of living. Her journeys took her to places she had only dreamed of as a young girl, from the windswept coastal cliffs of the north to the sun-baked deserts of the south. Everywhere she went, she carried with her the wisdom of Eldervale and the teachings of the Amarok. One particularly memorable journey took her to the great city of Ironhold, a sprawling metropolis of smoke and steel that stood as a testament to human ingenuity and some would say hubris. The city's massive factories belched black smoke into the sky, its rivers ran dark with pollutants, and the surrounding land lay barren and lifeless. As Lyra walked through the crowded streets, her heart heavy with the sight of so much destruction, she couldn't help but think of the Amarok's words about the consequences of human actions rippling far and wide. Here in this city of iron and smoke, she could see those consequences laid bare. But even in this seemingly hopeless place, Lyra found seeds of change waiting to sprout. She met with a group of young factory workers who had begun to question the cost of their city's progress. They listened with rapt attention as Lyra spoke of Eldervale, of the balance between progress and nature, and of the old magics that still lingered in the world. But how can we change an entire city? One young woman asked, her face smudged with soot but her eyes bright with hope. We're just workers, not leaders or mages. Lyra smiled, reminded of her own doubts so many years ago. You start small, she said. Plant a garden. Clean a riverbank. Teach others what you've learned. Change doesn't happen overnight, but every action, no matter how small, creates ripples. Inspired by Lyra's words, the workers began to act. They started with small things: window boxes filled with herbs, rooftop gardens that brought spots of green to the gray cityscape. They organized cleanups of the nearby river, and slowly but surely life began to return to its waters. As their efforts grew, so did their numbers. More and more people joined the movement, drawn by the promise of a better way of living. Even some of the factory owners, seeing the positive changes and sensing the shifting tide of public opinion, began to explore cleaner methods of production. It wasn't an easy process. There were setbacks and opposition from those who profited from the old ways. But the seed of change had been planted, and it grew with a stubborn persistence that would have made the ancient oak of Eldervale proud. Meanwhile, back in Eldervale, Thorn had taken on the role of teacher and guardian. Under his guidance, the village had become a center of learning, where people from all walks of life came to study the art of living in harmony with nature. One day, as Thorn was demonstrating the proper way to forge a plowshare that worked with the land rather than against it, he felt a familiar presence. Turning, he saw the Amarok standing at the edge of the village, its massive form somehow blending seamlessly with the surroundings. You have done well, humans of Eldervale, the Amarok rumbled, its voice carrying to every corner of the village. You have remembered the old ways and forged new paths. But your task is far from over. The villagers gathered, no longer afraid of the once dreaded creature, but respectful of its wisdom and power. Thorn stepped forward, bowing his head slightly. What more would you have us do, Great One? He asked. The Amarok's eyes, still glowing with that otherworldly light, swept over the assembled villagers. The world is changing, it said. The balance you have struck here must spread further, must take root in the hearts of all humans. For the trials that are to come will test not just Eldervale, but all of humanity. A murmur of concern rippled through the crowd. Lyra, her hair now white with age but her eyes still sharp, spoke up. What trials do you speak of, Amarok? The great wolf's form seemed to shimmer, and for a moment, they all saw visions of possible futures. Some bright and full of hope, others dark and fraught with peril. The choices made in the coming years will determine the fate of not just humanity, but of all life on this world, the Amarok said. You must be ready. You must be strong. And above all, you must remember the lessons you have learned here. With those ominous words, the Amarok turned and melted back into the forest, leaving the villagers to ponder its warning. But rather than give in to fear, they felt a sense of purpose, a determination to face whatever challenges lay ahead. Chapter 8: The Gathering Storm. As the years rolled on, the world beyond Eldervale began to change at an ever-increasing pace. News trickled in from travelers and merchants of great advancements in technology, of cities growing larger than ever before, and of kingdoms pushing their borders ever outward. But with these tales of progress came darker tidings as well, of forests razed to make way for farmland, of rivers choked with waste, and of ancient spirits retreating from the encroaching tide of human expansion. Lyra, now in her 40s with streaks of gray in her once dark hair, found herself spending more and more time away from Eldervale. Her reputation as a mediator between the human world and the realm of spirits had grown, and she was often called upon to help resolve conflicts between expanding human settlements and the natural world they were displacing. It was during one such mission that Lyra first sensed the true scale of the coming crisis. She had been summoned to a coastal kingdom far to the south, where a massive storm had devastated the shoreline. As she walked along the battered coast, she felt a deep wrongness in the air, a sense of imbalance that went beyond the aftermath of a mere natural disaster. Closing her eyes, Lyra reached out with the spiritual senses she had honed over the years. What she perceived chilled her to her core. The very fabric of the natural world seemed to be fraying, the delicate balance between the physical and spiritual realms teetering on the brink of collapse. Rushing back to Eldervale, Lyra called for an emergency gathering. The villagers assembled beneath the ancient oak, its leaves now tinged with gold as autumn approached. Thorn stood at her side, his once black beard now streaked with silver, as she recounted what she had seen and felt. The Amarok's warning was no idle threat, Lyra concluded, her voice grave. The world is out of balance, and if we don't act soon, the consequences will be catastrophic. Murmurs of concern rippled through the crowd. Old Gareth, now well past his 100th year but still sharp of mind, spoke up. "What can we do?" he asked, his voice quavering but determined. "We're but one village, and the problem you speak of spans the entire world." Ira, leaning heavily on a gnarled staff, stepped forward. "We may be one village," she said, her eyes bright with the wisdom of ages, "but we are not alone. Over the years our teachings have spread. There are those in every corner of the world who remember the old ways, who strive for balance." Thorn nodded, stroking his beard thoughtfully. "We need to call them together," he said. "A gathering of all those who walk the path of balance. Together we might find a way to avert this crisis." And so, messengers were sent out to every land where Eldervale's influence had reached. They carried with them an urgent summons, calling for a great council to be held at the turning of the year. As the appointed day drew near, people began to arrive in Eldervale from all corners of the world. There were druids from the misty western isles, shamans from the vast eastern steppes, and wise women from the southern deserts. Scholars and leaders from great cities came too, drawn by the growing realization that their world stood on the brink of catastrophe. The day of the council dawned clear and cold, the winter sun casting long shadows across the snow-covered village square. At the foot of the ancient oak, now bare of leaves but still pulsing with life, sat the Amarok. Its presence sent a ripple of awe through the gathered crowd. Lyra stepped forward to open the proceedings, her voice carrying clearly in the crisp air. "Friends, allies, seekers of balance," she began. "We have called you here because our world faces a threat greater than any in living memory. The very fabric of nature is unraveling, and with it, the barrier between the physical and spiritual realms." For 3 days and nights, the council debated and discussed. Tales were shared of spirits retreating from human lands, of natural disasters increasing in frequency and intensity, of ancient magics failing. Theories were put forth and discarded, plans proposed and refined. On the dawn of the 4th day, as the first light of the sun crested the eastern mountains, the Amarok spoke. Its voice, like rolling thunder, silenced all other conversation. "The task before you is greater than any humans have faced before," it said, its glowing eyes sweeping over the assembly. "You must heal not just your relationship with the natural world, but the very fabric of reality itself." A hush fell over the gathering as the enormity of the task sank in. Then slowly people began to nod. They had come too far, learned too much to back down now. As the council concluded, a plan began to take shape. Teams would be dispatched to key locations around the world, places where the veil between worlds was thinnest, where the imbalance was most severe. There they would perform rituals to strengthen the fabric of reality, to restore the flow of natural energies. But it wouldn't be enough to simply patch the holes. The root causes of the imbalance had to be addressed. And so, another group would travel to the great cities and seats of power, armed with the wisdom of Eldervale and the urgency of their mission, to convince leaders and common folk alike of the need for change. As the visitors began to depart, each returning to their homes with a sense of purpose and a fragment of the greater plan, Lyra found herself standing once again before the Amarok. "You have set in motion events that will shape the fate of this world," the great wolf said, its voice softer now, almost gentle. "But remember, young one, that the greatest changes often start in the smallest of places. Do not neglect your own village, your own heart, in the pursuit of this greater goal." Lyra nodded, understanding the wisdom in the Amarok's words. As she watched the last of the visitors disappear into the winter-bare forest, she felt a mixture of hope and trepidation. The path ahead would be difficult, fraught with challenges she could scarcely imagine. But as she turned back to the village, to the faces of friends and neighbors who had supported her through so much, she knew that whatever came, they would face it together. The great work was just beginning, and the fate of the world hung in the balance. But in that moment, watching the sun rise over Eldervale, Lyra felt a spark of hope ignite in her heart. It was a spark that would need to be nurtured, protected, and spread if they were to have any chance of success. As she walked back to the village, Lyra made a silent vow. Whatever it took, however long it might take, she would see this through. For the sake of Eldervale, for the world, and for the delicate balance that held everything together. Chapter 9. The Threads of Fate. As the teams dispersed across the world, each carrying a piece of the grand plan conceived at the council, Eldervale settled into a new rhythm. The village became a hub of activity, a central point from which information flowed in and out, coordinating the global effort to restore balance. Lyra found herself at the heart of this whirlwind, her days filled with reading reports, sending instructions, and meditating to maintain her connection with the spiritual realm. Thorn worked tirelessly, forging tools and talismans imbued with old magic to aid the teams in their tasks. Lyra, despite her advanced age, spent long hours poring over ancient texts, seeking any scrap of knowledge that might help their cause. Months passed, and slowly reports of success began to trickle in. In the misty highlands of the north, a team had reawakened a dormant ley line, sending pulses of vital energy coursing through the land. Along the southern coast, another group had brokered a peace between warring human factions and the local sea spirits, restoring harmony to a once troubled region. But for every victory, there seemed to be a new challenge. Some rulers, drunk on power and wealth, refused to heed the warnings brought by Eldervale's emissaries. In other places, the damage to the natural world was so severe that even the most potent rituals struggled to make a difference. As the second year of their great work drew to a close, Lyra found herself once again standing before the ancient oak in Eldervale's square. The tree, which had stood sentinel over the village for countless generations, was showing signs of distress. Its leaves were sparse and yellowed, its bark cracked and peeling in places. Placing her hand on the rough trunk, Lyra closed her eyes and reached out with her senses. What she felt made her gasp. The oak, like the world itself, was caught in a tug-of-war between the forces of balance and chaos. It was a microcosm of the greater struggle, a tangible representation of the stakes they faced. "We're running out of time," she murmured, opening her eyes to find Thorn and Ira standing nearby, concern etched on their faces. "The reports from the field teams confirm it," Thorn said grimly. "The imbalance is accelerating. If we don't find a way to turn the tide soon." He didn't need to finish the thought. They all knew what failure would mean. Ira, her face a web of wrinkles but her eyes still sharp, spoke up. "There is one option we haven't yet considered," she said slowly, as if weighing each word. "An ancient ritual so powerful and dangerous that it was hidden away, meant to be used only in the direst of circumstances." Lyra and Thorn turned to her, hope and apprehension warring in their expressions. "What kind of ritual?" Lyra asked. Ira's gaze was solemn as she replied. "One that would require a great sacrifice. It would allow us to channel the combined energy of all our efforts, all the restored ley lines and awakened spirits, into a single world-altering surge. But the one who performs the ritual may not survive the process." A heavy silence fell over the three of them. The weight of Ira's words hung in the air, the implications clear. This could be their chance to save the world, but at a terrible cost. "I'll do it," Lyra said without hesitation, her voice steady despite the fear clutching at her heart. "Lyra, no," Thorn protested, reaching out to grasp her arm. "There must be another way." But Lyra shook her head, a sad smile on her face. "You know as well as I do that there isn't. We've come too far, sacrificed too much to falter now. If my life is the price for saving the world, for preserving the balance we've worked so hard to restore, then so be it." As the sun set on Eldervale, casting long shadows across the village square, preparations for the ritual began. Word was sent to all the teams across the world, instructing them to ready themselves for one final coordinated effort. In the days that followed, Lyra spent every waking moment in preparation. She meditated, focusing her mind and spirit for the task ahead. She wrote letters to her loved ones, pouring out her heart in what she knew might be her final words to them. And she walked the paths of Eldervale, committing every detail of her beloved home to memory. On the night of the new moon, when the world was at its darkest, the ritual began. Lyra stood at the center of a complex array of symbols drawn on the ground before the ancient oak. Around her, the villagers of Eldervale gathered, their voices raised in a low, haunting chant. As Ira began to recite the words of the ritual, Lyra felt the power building around her. It was like standing in the eye of a storm, energy crackling through the air, making her skin tingle and her hair stand on end. She thought of all the people across the world who were participating in this moment, lending their energy and their hope to the cause. She thought of the Amarok, of the lessons it had taught her. She thought of Thorn, steadfast and strong, and of Ira, wise beyond measure. And as the ritual reached its crescendo, as the power threatened to overwhelm her, Lyra thought of Eldervale, of the village that had raised her, that had stood as a beacon of hope in a world teetering on the brink. With a final, determined breath, she opened herself fully to the surging energies. The world exploded into light. Chapter 10. The Light of Dawn. In that moment of overwhelming light, Lyra felt herself dissolve into the very fabric of existence. Time lost all meaning, and she was both everything and nothing, a single thread in the vast tapestry of life. The energy surged through her, a tidal wave of power and purpose that threatened to consume her entirely. But within that chaos, she felt the presence of the spirits, the ancient guardians of the land, the whispers of the forest, the songs of the rivers. They surrounded her, guiding her, lending her their strength. She was not alone. She was part of something much greater. As the ritual reached its peak, the symbols drawn on the ground began to glow with an ethereal light, illuminating the village square and spilling out into the surrounding forest. The energy pulsed like a heartbeat, resonating with the very essence of the world. Lyra focused on channeling that energy, directing it towards the ley lines that crisscrossed the land, the very veins of the earth. With every ounce of her being, she called upon the balance that had been disrupted. The energy surged outward, weaving through the ley lines, awakening the dormant spirits, and restoring the natural order. She could feel the land responding, the trees standing taller, the rivers flowing clearer, the very air humming with life. But as the power surged, so did the cost. Lyra felt her own essence being drawn into the ritual, her physical form beginning to fade. She knew that this was the price she had to pay, and she embraced it. With her final thoughts, she sent out a message to her friends, her family, and the world. "Remember the balance," she whispered into the light. "Protect the land. Cherish the spirits. Live in harmony." And then, with one final surge of energy, the light exploded outward in a brilliant flash, illuminating the entire landscape. The villagers of Eldervale shielded their eyes from the brilliance, feeling the warmth wash over them like a gentle tide. When the light finally faded, Lyra was gone. But in her place stood a vibrant aura that enveloped the ancient oak, its leaves bursting forth in a brilliant green, shimmering with life. The tree had absorbed the energy of the ritual, becoming a living monument to the sacrifice Lyra had made. Chapter 11. The Aftermath. As the villagers slowly opened their eyes, they were met with a transformed world. The air felt lighter, the colors more vivid, and the sounds of nature more harmonious. It was as if a veil had been lifted, revealing the true beauty of their surroundings. Thorn, standing at the forefront of the gathering, felt a profound sense of loss wash over him. But it was quickly replaced by a deep gratitude for the woman who had given everything for their future. "We must honor her sacrifice," he said, his voice steady despite the tears in his eyes. "We will carry her message forward. We will protect this land and the balance she fought so hard to restore." Ira stepped forward, her heart heavy but her spirit resolute. "Lyra's sacrifice has awakened the spirits and restored the balance. We must ensure that her legacy lives on, not just in our hearts, but in our actions." The villagers nodded in agreement, a renewed sense of purpose igniting within them. They began to gather around the ancient oak, their hands joined as they formed a circle. Together they vowed to uphold the teachings of Lyra and the Amarok, to live in harmony with nature, and to share their knowledge with others. As the days turned into weeks, Eldervale became a beacon of hope and wisdom. People traveled from far and wide to learn from the villagers, to understand the importance of balance and respect for the natural world. The teachings of Lyra spread like wildfire, igniting a movement that transcended borders and cultures. Chapter 12. The Legacy of Eldervale. Years passed, and the world began to change in ways that had once seemed impossible. Cities embraced sustainable practices, leaders listened to the voices of the people and the spirits, and communities began to work together to restore the land. The balance that had been so fragile was now being woven into the very fabric of society. In Eldervale, the ancient oak flourished, its branches reaching out like welcoming arms. It became a gathering place for the villagers and visitors alike, a symbol of resilience and hope. Children played beneath its boughs, their laughter echoing through the village, while elders shared stories of Lyra and the Amarok, ensuring that the lessons of the past would never be forgotten. Thorn took on the role of mentor, guiding the next generation in the ways of balance and respect for the land. Lyra, though aging, remained a wellspring of wisdom, her connection to the spirits deepening with each passing year. One crisp autumn day, as the leaves turned golden and the air grew cool, Thorn stood beneath the oak, surrounded by the villagers. They had gathered to celebrate the Festival of Balance, a new tradition honoring Lyra's sacrifice and the harmony they had achieved. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a warm glow over the village, Thorn raised his voice. Today we celebrate not just the balance we have restored, but the spirit of Lyra, who gave everything for our future. Let us honor her by living each day with gratitude, respect, and love for our world. The villagers cheered, their voices rising in unison, echoing through the trees. They danced and sang, their hearts filled with joy and remembrance. And as the stars began to twinkle in the night sky, a soft breeze swept through the village, carrying with it a whisper of gratitude from the spirits of the land. Chapter 13: A New Dawn. As the years turned into decades, the story of Eldervale and the sacrifice of Lyra became legend. The village thrived, its teachings spreading far and wide, inspiring countless others to seek balance in their own lives. But the world was still a place of challenges. New threats emerged, from climate change to resource depletion, and the struggle for balance continued. Yet the legacy of Eldervale served as a guiding light, reminding people of the power of unity, respect, and the importance of listening to the whispers of the earth. One day, a group of young villagers, inspired by the stories of their elders, ventured into the forest to explore the ancient paths. As they walked, they stumbled upon a clearing they had never seen before, where the air shimmered with magic and the trees seemed to hum with life. In the center of the clearing stood a magnificent wolf, its fur glistening like starlight. The young villagers recognized it instantly. It was the Amarok, a guardian of the balance they had come to cherish. The Amarok regarded them with wise, glowing eyes. "You have grown strong, young ones," it said, its voice echoing like distant thunder. "You carry the spirit of Lyra within you, and it is time for you to forge your own path." The young villagers exchanged excited glances, feeling the weight of the moment. They had been chosen to continue the work of their ancestors, to protect the balance and ensure that the teachings of Eldervale lived on. With newfound determination, they vowed to carry forth the legacy of Lyra and the Amarok, to face the challenges of their time with courage and wisdom. They understood that the work was never truly finished. It was a continuous journey, a dance between humanity and nature, a cycle of learning, growth, and renewal. As they returned to Eldervale, the sun rose on the horizon, casting a golden light over the village. The ancient oak stood tall, its branches reaching towards the sky, a testament to the resilience of life and the enduring spirit of those who had come before. And so the story of Eldervale continued, a living tale of courage, sacrifice, and the unbreakable bond between humanity and the natural world. The legacy of Lyra and the Amarok would echo through the ages, a reminder that even in the face of darkness, hope could always be found, and that the power to change the world lay within each and every one of them. Epilogue: The Eternal Cycle. Generations later, the village of Eldervale remained a vibrant hub of knowledge and harmony. The teachings of balance had woven themselves into the very fabric of society, influencing art, culture, and governance. Festivals celebrating the earth, the spirits, and the interconnectedness of all life were held throughout the year, drawing people from near and far. On the anniversary of Lyra's sacrifice, the villagers gathered once more beneath the ancient oak. They lit candles, sharing stories of their ancestors and the lessons learned from the Amarok. As night fell, they released lanterns into the sky, each one representing a promise to uphold the balance and protect the land. As the lanterns floated upward, they formed a constellation of light, illuminating the darkness. And in that moment, the villagers felt the presence of Lyra and the spirits surrounding them, a gentle reminder that they were never alone. The cycle of life continued, the dance of humanity and nature ever unfolding. And though challenges would arise, the spirit of Eldervale would endure, a beacon of hope and a testament to the power of unity, love, and the eternal quest for balance. With each new dawn, the story of the mythical creature, the brave soul who confronted it, and the village that learned to live in harmony with the world would be passed down, a timeless tale of courage and redemption that would inspire generations to come. And so the legend of Eldervale lived on, a reminder that even the smallest actions could create ripples of change, shaping the world for the better, one heart at a time. This concludes the story of the mythical creature. Thank you for your patience and engagement throughout this journey. If you have any further requests or need assistance with anything else, feel free to ask.
Subscribe for more.